gentlemen, it's a great honour to be invited to address you this evening, and thank you very much indeed, Bill, for those very kind words. It's perfectly true that my book got to number 2 on the bestseller list, beaten only by a book about Michael Jackson. So that put me in my place. The great British historian Ronald Lewin said, "There is no rule of war that says that men can die on the battlefield, but that staff officers should not be vexed." And staff officers really were vexed in the greatest decision that the Western powers had to take during the Second World War, which was when to make the great cross-channel attack that we know as Operation Overlord or D-Day. The Americans, in their can-do spirit, wanted to cross the channel as early as possible, as early, in fact, as the fall of 1942. The British, of course, had been flung off the continent in the June of 1940. And the British didn't want to go back until such time as the Germans were weakened, desperately weakened, of course, on the Eastern Front. It's very important to remember, for me, the most central statistic of the Second World War, that for every 5 Germans killed in battle in the Second World War, 4 of them died on the Eastern Front. So the Russians were killing 4 out of the 5 Germans, and the British, Americans, Canadians, and the rest of the West killing the last German, as it were. And the way in which the 2 general staffs clashed constantly all the way through the war up until June 1943, where they simply could not agree, and you would have staff meetings where the British Chief of the Imperial General Staff would break pencils in half in the meeting, saying to Winston Churchill, "No, I disagree with you, Prime Minister." You would have General Wedemeyer, the Anglophobe American general, saying, writing in his diary, that he wanted to lean across and sock General Brooke in the jaw over a decision over the timing of D-Day. And of course, in a sense, they would feel like that, because the lives of tens of thousands of men were dependent on the decisions that these men came to. And you had meetings where everybody was told to leave the room, 60 people were told to get out of the room, in order to ensure that the key decision makers, the 6 chiefs of the general staff, were able to come together and come to an agreement. And they finally, in fact, in one of the meetings that was held in the Salon Rosé at Chateau Frontenac in Quebec, in the Great Quebec Conference, after they got all of the people out of the room and just left it to the 6 members of the general staff, because the row had got so aggressive and so personal and so uptight and vicious, at the end of the meeting, Admiral Lord Mountbatten had 2 enormous blocks of ice brought into the room in order to demonstrate something to the chiefs of staff. The first one was a normal block of ice. The idea was whether or not it would be possible to lasso an iceberg in the Arctic and bring it down to use as a giant aircraft carrier off the coast of Normandy. He had one block of ice that was just made of ice, and another one that was made of wood chippings and ice, which was called pikecrete, after its inventor, a man called Geoffrey Pike. And he took out his revolver and fired into the ice, the pure ice, and it exploded just like that all over the place, making it clear that the Luftwaffe would obviously be able to destroy any iceberg. Then he fired at the block of wood chippings and ice, and in the words of Alan Brooke's diary, the bullet flew around the room like an angry bee. Quite what he could have considered doing, testing the ricochet abilities of this thing in a room full of the general staff, is anyone's guess. But nonetheless, one of the young officers who had been told to leave the room earlier said, "Oh my God, they're shooting at each other now," which is a sign of quite how aggressive it got. And yet, nonetheless, and the reason that the Americans hadn't got their way earlier was because FDR, President Roosevelt, had supported Winston Churchill's view of the grand strategy, and that of also General Brooke. We're very fortunate, by the way, to have Winston Churchill's granddaughter here in the audience today. And when Churchill and Brooke and FDR believed something about the timing of D-Day, that is what happened. However, at a key meeting at the Trident Conference in June 1943, does that mean I've gone on for 10 minutes or I've got 10 minutes left? 10 minutes left, right. Sorry, apologies. One gets into the zone when it comes to the Second World War. At a key meeting at the Trident Conference of June 1943, FDR said that the time had come to actually choose a date for D-Day. So they came up with the date of the 5th of May 1944. It had to be put back to the 5th of June later on because of the number of assault craft that they had, of these landing boats that they needed. But nonetheless, the die had been cast, and the reason that the Americans were able, by that stage, to state exactly when it would be, and the British, even though, of course, it was going to be launched from the United Kingdom, were no longer capable of preventing this cross-channel attack taking place at this particular time, was that by that stage, the American contribution in terms of men and material was wildly outnumbering that of the United Kingdom. Indeed, in the calendar year 1944, when the British produced 28,000 warplanes, the Russians and Germans produced 40,000 warplanes each. The United States produced no fewer than 98,000 warplanes. So they were, I'm so sorry, did I say that Russia and the Russians and Germans produced 40,000 each? So you added up, the Americans were producing almost as many planes of war as the whole of the rest of the world put together. And so finally, of course, they were able to call the shots, and rightly so. And so this decision was taken that the great cross-channel attack, which they'd been waiting for years, was in fact going to take place on the 5th of June 1944. They then, of course, on the actual day itself, had to put it back because of the weather, because of the feeling that there were, the knowledge that there was going to be a very heavy storm the night before. Now, could it have been done earlier, ladies and gentlemen? Could the millions of lives that were lost in occupied Europe by the all those people killed by the Nazis, many millions of them, have been saved by an earlier cross-channel attack? Was it just that the British were fearful? Brooke, of course, had fought in the Battle of the Somme. Winston Churchill had fought in the trenches too. These men were nerve-wracked about the possibility of German counterattack. When I was at university, I was told that if I wanted to be a historian, never to use the word inevitable. Inevitable, nothing is inevitable in history. And that is true, except for German counterattack. When one looks at Caen, when one looks at Kasserine Pass, when one looks at the battles of Salerno and Anzio, when one looks, of course, at the Battle of the Bulge, that incredible 39 divisional attack through the Ardennes, with searchlights bouncing off the clouds, with men attacking through 3, 4, 5 feet of snow, with these all the orders being given by hand, so we weren't able to break the codes. This, ladies and gentlemen, shows the capacity for German counterattack. We also hadn't won the Battle of the Atlantic by then, which meant that every single armoured division required 1,600 tons of supplies, ammunition and petrol fuel every single day. And it ordered, therefore, to land the requisite number of divisions in France. You had to be certain that you could resupply them, and the only way you could do that was to have destroyed the German U-boat fleet in the Atlantic. And that wasn't done until August 1943, because in the January of 1942, the Germans added an extra rotor to the Enigma machine, the Ultra machine, which meant that the whole of the Ultra decrypts were thrown into complete gobbledygook. No one could read them. And that wasn't broken back into by the boffins at Bletchley Park until the December of 1942, you didn't have complete air superiority either at any point up until D-Day. But on the day of D-Day, when the Luftwaffe were able to make 318 sorties, the British and Americans and other Allied forces, air forces, were able to make no fewer than 14,388 sorties. So the air was completely dominated across across Normandy, simply by the Allies. And there were other things to do with the wonderful Mulberry harbours, the Pluto, the pipeline under the ocean, which pumped 50 million gallons of diesel for the tanks. None of this would have been ready any earlier than the June of 1944. And so, historically, it was the right time to have done it. Historically, any earlier would have been an immense danger. And on the night of before D-Day, Winston Churchill wrote to his wife, Clementine, to say that he feared that the next day some 20,000 bodies might be washed up against the shore. It actually turned up to be nothing like that, fortunately, although over 5,000 people lost their lives that day. And the liberty and liberation of Europe was assured. But it strikes me, ladies and gentlemen, that we're very fortunate to have had leaders of the quality of FDR and of Brooke and of Marshall and of Winston Churchill, who were able to have these arguments in open man-to-man debates, aggressive debates. Yes, they were, but nonetheless they were very elemental, but they actually, in the end, came up with, thank God for the people who were taking part in those terrifying attacks, the right answer. Thank you very much indeed.